UConn takes on St. John's tonight, but what's on everyone's mind, really? What will be their seeding in the upcoming big road challenge versus South Carolina? You're locked on.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, I want to say how much we are grateful for all of you and take a moment to just say we appreciate all of your support, whether it's you're a fan of the women's team, men's team, both, even if you're just one of these freaks that loves just the football team. I love you guys as well. It's incredible support. We're at over 10,100 subs on YouTube, doing a good job on the audio side. So that's all because of you. And to show that gratitude, we're giving back. We're donating 10% of our revenue to Husky Ticket Project, helping send kids to UConn games. All right. We bring to the program every other day, essentially. Bella Tomaino, let's get her on the show. How are you this morning?
Good.
First question for you. I basically the same thing I said in the cold open. I know we play St. John's tonight. We've talked about this ad nauseum. Big East is not that good this year.
Not at all.
Do you feel as if what's on people's minds are the South Carolina game and where this team is going to end up in the tournament?
Absolutely. I think that's the number one priority at this point. We talked about Big East kind of being throwaway games, kind of garbage time games. We talked about last week not overlooking Tennessee to South Carolina, but I think we can safely say we can somewhat overlook St. John's to South Carolina because it's not the same caliber of play by any means. So I think tonight we'll be fine, and I think it's officially definitely time to look over to South Carolina, Don Staley company.
Yeah, I think for me it's like it's kind of sad in a way, right? I don't want to, because I was always taught like you never look past an opponent. You show them respect, and I respect St. John's. I respect their coaches and their staff,
100%.
but at the same time, it's like if you're going to keep blowing out teams by 30 and 40 points, it does get kind of uninteresting unless it's one of these big time opponents. Like when UConn was beating everyone by 50, that's interesting because you're so dominant, you're so good. But if you're just beating the inferior opponents by XYZ, that's where this has kind of a little bit of a weird vibe this year. They're so good, but yet they're still kind of like teetering on if they're one of the elite teams this year, or if they're just good for being in the Big East, right? You've talked about this. If you want to take some of this, like what region will they be in? Like where do you want to see them if they get when they get into the tournament, not if.
So a few weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, it looked like they were going to end up in Region 3 in Birmingham, and they were going to be a 2 seed. I believe we had them looking at playing Lehigh. I can't exactly remember who it was.
Yep.
And now, after obviously the Tennessee loss, shaking things up, the South Carolina loss, and just some other, interesting games throughout the past week or two, it's looking like UConn shifted to Region 2, same spot in Birmingham, and it looks like they might be a 2 seed playing Albany in that first round. Now, the only thing that is a little bit intimidating is you look at that number 1 seed, and it's South Carolina. And listen, I understand that at the end of the day, I think this is one of those tournaments where you can look at it. Like last year, I think everyone really expected South Carolina. Last year it was
South Carolina.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think everyone expected South Carolina last year. And they kind of ran away with it. This year, I do think it's one of the more wide open tournaments. I do think that, South Carolina's probably one of, the favorites, but at the end of the day, UCLA, we talked about, huge, big team. And at the end of the day, I don't know. I don't know if South Carolina is the best draw for us. I don't know if this is, I said that Notre Dame would be not so great draw just because of our record against them in the tournament. But I don't know. I don't know if being against South Carolina is any better. And I guess the question I have for you, Mark, is kind of what do they need to do to increase their seeding if they want to make that deeper run past the Elite Eight and get to that Final Four or even the finals?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first off, I don't think they are, even if they beat South Carolina, which I don't think they will. I don't think that's going to elevate them to a 1 seed because look at it from this perspective. Sorry, I had like 4 hours of sleep last night, and people will get mad at me for yawning, but that's life. I would tell you that I think this UConn women's team, their ceiling is a 2 seed. Right now, they're teetering on whether they're a 3 seed, and I'll tell you why. Because if they're the 7th team in the country, they're right now, the fact that the Elite Eight matchup is South Carolina, who's the second best team in the country, even though they lost to Texas. UCLA, South Carolina, Texas, Notre Dame, those are your top 4 teams. So the fact that they were moved from arguably the 3rd or 4th best 1 seed to either arguably the 2nd or best 1 seed just shows that the committee is starting to drop them, or the bracketologists is starting to drop them down a peg. So, and I also need this to be said. We're going to talk about what's a more favorable draw. I think actually it's playing Texas, and I don't mean that because Texas just beat South Carolina. It's a conference game between Texas and South Carolina. Sometimes those get squirrely. I don't think there's a really great draw for UConn out of any of this. But what I would say is whether it's Texas or UCLA, I think is the more favorable than playing a South Carolina or Notre Dame, just because of the pedigree. South Carolina has done it a million times. Notre Dame is kind of like our bugaboo. I think with either UCLA or Texas, you look at it from a perspective of these teams aren't experienced in the tournament, at least with the pedigree with the coaches and everything that comes with it. That matters. That matters 100%. And it may not matter when it comes to like per talent, like maybe the other teams are more talented than UConn or more physical. But I think there really isn't a great matchup. You can't be like, well, if you play Texas, they don't have height or they don't have this. All of these teams have some things that UConn has unfavorable matchups against, and that's just kind of part of the sport. It's just a matter of if they can meet the challenge. And I think that's the biggest part is like they're going to play South Carolina here in 4 days. And I think we both agree that we don't know if they're going to meet the challenge.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really good measure of how we can perform in tournament time. Again, that doesn't say that if we lose that game, doesn't mean that, we're not going to be able to make a run or get to the Final Four. But it does say, okay, look, we can compete with them. And if we win that game, you don't want to get, too dramatic and say, okay, we're back and deserve a 1 seed. Like you said, I do think 2 is the ceiling. The thing I want to say too is I completely agree with the fact that you're saying the Notre Dame and South Carolina you want to stay away from, because a lot of times it's like, act like you've been here, and UConn has been there. And UConn, that's the one thing that they have over every single team is they have been elite forever. They are women's basketball, regardless of where they are now or where they're going to be in 5 years. The UConn women's team is the golden child of women's basketball, and that's it. Like, they have had the experience. They have the winningest coach in all of college basketball, and that right there is going to be our X factor. Is I know Geno's people are saying he kind of lost it a little bit, but listen, he has had to pull out some big games against, the Pat Summits of the world, the Muffin McGraws of the world, and he hasn't always been successful, and especially this year, they haven't really won that big game yet. But when it comes to March, I've said this before and I'll say it again. March is different, and we have people that have had experience and know how to win in big games in the past. This year's been different, but listen, I don't know. Tournament time, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we're gonna go to a break here in a second, but I would say that, and this is not me talking. I'm playing devil's advocate. The detractors or the people that are, mostly people that are insufferable about with either UConn men or women, like don't have the ability to gain perspective, even though the women are in a longer drought than the men for the first time ever, right? With 9 years. I just think it's one of those things where people need to understand, like, this is just not the same sport anymore. Like we are still the standard bearers, and we are still the greatest program to ever, create to exist in women's basketball. I don't think that's even in question. But there is a faction of fans on the UConn side and haters alike that feel like UConn's lost a step and feel like Geno has as well, whether it's in recruiting, which we're going to talk about later, whether it's in in-game tactics, teams aren't tough, that kind of stuff. Like all of the things like putting together, we had a little conversation about this, about maybe, some of the players are a little more focused on not being injured so they can continue their careers. So maybe there's a little mental aspect to it all. I don't know if any of that's right. But I will say that I wouldn't count out Geno in a single elimination tournament because he's done it so many times, even with teams that aren't as talented as those who are currently constituted with the one seeds that we could potentially face. All right, I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the big bad bear on the block in South Carolina and what we have to do, and can we beat them on the road in Columbia? We're going to talk about that coming up after the break. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC. I found that decluttering and refreshing my space really helps me get back into a routine, especially with everything going on during the season. Recently, I realized I needed a new desk to keep up with all my UConn coverage, and Wayfair made it incredibly easy. Their huge selection had plenty of options that fit my style and my budget. The best part? Free, hassle-free delivery, even for bigger items like a desk. Plus, the site was super easy to navigate, and I found exactly what I needed in no time. Whether you're tidying up, clearing out, or just want to give your space a fresh look to start the year, Wayfair has everything you need. Give your home the refresh it deserves. Head to Wayfair.com right now. That's Wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home.
All right, welcome back to Locked On UConn. Bella Tomaino alongside Mark Zanetto once again. Mark, you alluded to it. We got a big one this Sunday. The Huskies taking on South Carolina. Looking at just kind of going into some history of, this matchup. Huskies do lead it. They're 9-5 all time against South Carolina. But the one thing that very, very glaring, very, very a standout stat is they have not won in Columbia since 2016, February 8th, 2016. And since then, in the last 6 matchups, South Carolina's got our number. They're 5-1 in the last 6. That alone, a little bit scary, little bit interesting, but things are different. We still, we won once in stores back in 2021. But again, these teams are different. We got ESPN College Game Day coming. That's going to set some stakes a little bit higher. We know, we've all seen what South Carolina has accomplished. We've all seen what Dawn Staley, what she's done for this program. For you, Mark, what do you think the keys are for Sunday if the Huskies are going to want to pull out a game and, kind of get back in that tournament talk?
This is a tough one, man. Like, doing a little bit of like advanced scouting on South Carolina, preparing for this show, and also for what will be a live reaction show after the game, the 16th. Joyce Edwards, Malaysia Fulwiley, Chloe Kitts, Raven Johnson. The names go on. And if you're not familiar with some of them, let me just give you one crazy stat. They have 9 players that average 18 minutes a game. 9. So UConn, if they're going to win this game, if they even want to sniff being competitive, they have to get off to a fast start, because they can't like, blow it all in one spot. They really do have to focus on getting more people involved, get out to a hot start, ride Sarah, ride Paige. AZ's got to shoot it well. If they collapse on your stars, you're going to need someone like Ashlyn Shade, KK Arnold, Morgan Shelley to give you solid minutes. Because, I mean, just if you just go on their regular season stats, I know they're blowing out teams. So some of it may be a little bit, inflated because, maybe someone like Maddie McDonald doesn't get 14 minutes a game really, because she's only, she's played 16. But I mean, just think about like everybody that's played 24 games. That's the amount of time. That's the amount of games they played total, with the exception of like Ashton Watkins, who's out for the year with a knee injury and a couple of like misses from like Tessa Johnson and Chloe Kitts missing a game or two here and there. Averaging 19 or 20 points, 20 minutes a game, and having multiple players that are around double digits. They have Joyce Edwards is their version of Sarah Strong. She's averages 12.3 points and 5 rebounds. I don't think she's as good, but I think she's a little more athletic. And so she's not a 3-point threat at all, but that's not South Carolina's game. Their game is essentially mounds of talent. And it reminds me of, if anyone's football fans, it kind of reminds me of when Alabama was in their heyday with Nick Saban. And even if they'd have an injury, it was like, okay, we're just going to throw another 5-star behind, that offensive lineman or that running back that got hurt. It's like, I'm sorry, that guy was the 3rd string running back. Have you seen it? Like, so these are the things that you see with these Dawn Staley teams. And the fact that there's no like early entry into the WNBA draft, it allows that team to continue to kind of like further the pipeline. And that's what this team is. And so UConn hasn't done that as well. And have they been hit by the injury bug? Absolutely. South Carolina's been hit by it by a little bit, not as much as UConn. And that's the difference. It becomes a gap, though. Like, there is a gap of talent between these two teams. And I don't know if UConn is ready to meet that challenge. The answer is, I don't think UConn, I think UConn gets not blown out, but I think it's going to be a pretty, it's going to be like a workman-like performance, so to speak, right? 10, 15-point game for South Carolina. I don't know if you agree or you have different thoughts.
I think I can see where you're coming from, it not being a really super close game for UConn. For me, on the other hand, I think there's 3 big things that can, hopefully lead UConn to victory. For me, I think it's Paige and AZ have to show up. That's something that I think everyone, it's a no-brainer. I think they have to have between, 30 and 40 points combined. I think they each need to have a night where they go out and shoot really well and are able to create their own shots, and Geno can scheme
Can I ask you a
and get
question?
them open. Yeah, absolutely.
Off of that, so like I think you're spot on. I think whether it's 30 or 40 or 50, whatever it is, a big number between the two of them. Who else other than Sarah has to step up for that to matter? Because even if they score 40 between them, just between the two of them, and you get your typical Sarah Strong performance of like 15 to 20 points, South Carolina does not give up too many open shots. Like, who else needs to step up outside of the main 2 or 3 to, do you think that's going to happen? We haven't seen it yet. Like, that's right. What I'm curious about.
I think because of how athletic and quick of a team South Carolina is, I think it's got to be KK Arnold, because she's a player that can match their athleticism. She can match their quickness and her ability to change the pace up. Her, abilities in transition to kind of mess up defenses. I think that she's a player that we saw her do it a little bit in Tennessee. I would say is probably one of her best games of the season, especially the fact that it was against, a team like Tennessee. I think that's what it's going to take. Now, on the other hand, like, listen, I think they also, like you said, have to play a complete 40 minutes of basketball. We saw it. And again, I don't want to keep going back to Tennessee, but that was, the most, recency bias, whatever. They didn't play a complete 40 minutes. They played a decent first half. They outscored Tennessee in the 4th quarter, but the 3rd quarter was awful, right? They're going to need to play a complete basketball game, and it could be an overtime matchup. If they are able to keep it close, it could go into some extra minutes. And then finally, I think everyone's same thing is have to limit second chances for South Carolina on the offensive end. They can't give up 17, 20 offensive rebounds or 15, even 15 offensive rebounds.
Great point.
I think you need to make sure that, boxing out has to be the quote of the week. Box out like your life depends on it, because if they get second chances, they're going to run us out of the gym. Because you know what? You look at it, UConn doesn't have any good wins. That's not South Carolina. South Carolina has 9 ranked wins on the season this year. 9. And their only 2 losses come to 2 top 5 teams, UCLA and Texas. And looking at that, if you on paper, UConn should not win this game. And like you said, I think it could be a 10 to 15 point game. But because I never want to count UConn out because of their history, I think they have a chance, and I'm going to give them a chance, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm right. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to do those 3 things I said, among a lot of other things at the end of the day.
Yeah, and traditionally, I would say you're right, but I also don't think like this is not a relatively tall team. Like if you look at like Joyce Edwards is 6'3", Chloe Kitts is 6'2", 6'3". There's one other girl on this team. Let me get her name because she plays a little bit, but she's not like a big time threat. She averages like 7 points and 5 rebounds. They just do it by committee. Like Sonia Fegan, she's 6'3". So like there's no like 6'6", 6'7" like Lauren Betts at UCLA that you're like, man, that's gonna be a really tough challenge. But the fact that they have 3 or 4 people at 6'2", 6'3" that are their forwards, because they lost Ashlyn Watkins at center, is kind of like killing me softly here, right? They don't have the the one person that you're like, you have to stop this person. They have many. So that's the issue. They're not a great 3-point shooting team. So you're 1,000% right. Tessa Johnson and Chloe Kitts are their only 40% 3-point shooters. Tiana Papiao is about 37%. They don't shoot a ton of threes. They shoot, I think they shoot around 10 or 11 a game, which isn't a ton. Joyce Edwards doesn't shoot threes. Ashlyn Watkins certainly didn't when she was available. Bree Hall is a good 3-point shooter. She doesn't, she averages about 6 points a game, but she's about 40%. Raven Johnson, who's one of their better players, only is a 28% 3-point shooter. So if they can force South Carolina to outside shots and rebound and understand mentally that when you give up 3-point shots like they did against Tennessee, long rebounds will happen. So they could probably get some transition opportunities between Paige and Caitlin and Sarah getting out on the break with AZ, then absolutely do they have a chance. It's sports. This is, UConn's not the 50th ranked team in the country. They're the 7th ranked team. But sometimes the gap between 4 and 7 is like a mountain. Yeah. And I think from a talent perspective, I think there's a huge gap. But that's never stopped teams from winning. If talent was the only thing that mattered, then John Calipari would have 15 championships right now. It's really not about how much talent you can stack. It's about how good a coach you are. And Dawn Staley is a hell of a coach.
Absolutely. The way I look at it is, hey, any given Sunday, you know what I'm saying? It's a Sunday 1:00 matchup, or 1 or 12 o'clock. I believe it's 1:00. I
think it's 1.
Yeah, Sunday 1:00 matchup. Game day is going to be there. Stakes are going to be high. Texas and South Carolina just had the highest watched women's basketball game on ESPN. I'll tell you what, I think with the amount of fans that UConn has, I know Texas, they have a lot of people and a lot of
this is going to break the record.
Dedicated fans. Yeah, I think it smashes it. You think of everybody.
It's the first Sunday after football.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, I think this is going to be an insane game. And if it's a close one, I think you're going to see it all over Twitter, all over every single sports media platform. If it's a good one, and if it is a 10 to 15 point loss, then hey, it's not the end of the world, but it definitely is going to be a little bit scarier when it comes to tournament time in that case.
For sure. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about maybe the last piece of the puzzle signed for UConn for the 25-26 season, in Blanca Quiñonez, first South American player to ever play for UConn. She will be coming in. She is an absolute monster. I'm looking forward to that. We're going to talk about her and maybe a couple other recruitment stuff coming up after the break.
All right, so here we are talking about recruitment in the future of this team. Yesterday, Mark sent me a little a tweet saying that Blanca Quiñonez finally signed her official letter of intent to come to UConn. And the quote that she said was, "I truly feel that this is the place where I want and have to be." And for me, I think, Mark, right off the rip, I'm just going to ask you, what does have to mean to her? And does it still mean something to other recruits, for some other recruits coming to UConn? Because I think in the past, a lot of girls growing up is like, I have to go to UConn. I want to be great. Sure. I have to go to UConn. And now, has that have to go to UConn lost a little bit of its mojo? And does it help that Blanca's maybe saying that? Does it help some younger recruits maybe decide to go to UConn again?
I think they've lost some of the luster in the States, but I think what Geno's done over the years is he's spread out internationally to Canada, now to South America, but she's in Italy playing in the Italian league right now. I think what Geno wants going forward in his last kind of hurrah here, maybe the last 3 or 4 years of his career, he signed through for the next 4 years, whatever year that is. I'm tired. I don't want to even look it up. I think it'll be 28, 29 season, something in that range, right? I don't think he's going to sign another extension, although I could see them going like year to year with him until he wants to retire. So, but what I would say is, I think the have to go to UConn has lost a little luster in the States. They're without a McDonald's All-American for the first time in almost over a decade. And they've had number 1 recruits come here. Obviously, we just had Sarah. But they have also, Allie was 4, Morgan was 7, I believe, in the top 10 list of recruits last year. So it's not that they're devoid of talent. But it's not like it was when it was the UConn, Tennessee show or the UConn, South Carolina, LSU. There's so many more teams that can offer other things other than just playing for Geno Auriemma. And I think, unfortunately, for UConn, where they truly lack a little bit of luster is Paige is an anomaly all to herself. So, and honestly, to an extent, so is AZ. You're not getting crazy NIL deals at UConn like you can at LSU. Angel Reese and Flau'jae Johnson were millionaires before they even stepped out of LSU, and that's LSU's NIL collective. That's not these crazy NIL deals that Paige is getting through Verizon and stuff like that, right? So I think the idea is it's like a loaded question. It's a yes and no. I think for kids like Blanca, who's 17 years old, and I've done a little research on her. She's old school. You know what I mean? I think Geno wants that. I think Geno wants to find these players from all over the world, Gabby Malou-Momel, who is, was from Ireland via the Democratic Nation of the Congo, right? And so she'll be here in stores next year as well. So some of these big, fast international players did it with Jana as well, right? To kind of round out the roster with someone like Kellis Fisher, who plays at Monteverde and IMG Academy and stuff like that. So I think it's a yes and no. I think South Carolina has really kind of cornered the market on the top talent in the States, but just a lot of people playing basketball all over the world. So it doesn't mean that UConn can't compete. And Blanca is as good or better than any player coming out of the States next year. If she was playing in Michigan, she'd probably be the number 1 or 2 recruit in the country. I say that wholeheartedly, watching only film of her, and I know that sometimes can screw up an evaluation, but she is so good and so athletic that she is the type of player that UConn has not had in a very long time. You could put Sarah in that mix, but Blanca's been playing professional basketball for 3 years. She's a monster.
Yeah. Listen, I like it. I love it, and I feel like you are the guy to kind of talk to you about these recruits. Seems like you've obviously done a lot of research on them. Now, we talk about this and we say, they're still without that top 10 recruit, and it does stink, but definitely some pretty promising talent coming in. Now, I think the one thing I want to turn to is, yes, UConn is not getting the same caliber of talent that they once had. But let's say one thing, just in the realm of women's basketball, stinks for UConn, but it is great for women's basketball.
Absolutely.
That the talent isn't just cornered into UConn. We don't want to always see a team dominating, because especially in the women's game, we talked about how UConn's kind of in that second tier where the talents dropped off. It literally used to be UConn was number 1 and everybody else was in that second tier. They would literally win championships. I think it was, I want to say the 2014 when the men and women each won. I think they played Louisville that year. And again, you can fact check me on this, but I'm pretty sure they beat them again by double digits. And it just wasn't a close game. There was never a doubt that UConn was going to win that game. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
And looking at that, obviously that stinks. But when UConn lost, it was Mississippi State, right, in 2016, or 2017. When they lost, unfortunately, it was the end of an era. But it was the start, and it was the new beginning of what was to come for women's basketball, and the talent spreading it around, of viewership going up, because now everyone can say, okay, like this is going to be a game. You know what I'm saying? Like this is going to be interesting. We have Geno Auriemma versus Don Staley. It's no longer Geno Auriemma versus, who? Like,
Right.
and no discredit to any of the coaches that have coached against UConn when, they were kind of in the prime, because obviously they didn't always win, but it almost felt like they were going to be the favorite. So I think that's a good thing. I think, I'd have to say, Mark, I'm assuming you agree with that statement.
I totally agree, and just kind of doing a rundown of just the title game for the last, and we can go all the way back, but let's just go back from 2000. Let's go back to after Pat Summitt was kind of dethroned, right? So UConn plays Louisville in 2009, wins by 22 points. They had a tough game against Stanford in 2010. Both of those teams were 39-0. But think about that. Back-to-back years of 39-0, and then they beat Stanford 53-47, right? They don't win it in 2011. Baylor is 40-0 in 2012. They crushed Notre Dame in the final. Then Geno's back with UConn 2013. They win that game against Louisville by 33. Then the next year they go 40-0 to match Baylor's record. They kill Notre Dame in the championship game by 21. They play Syracuse in the final in 2016 and win by 31. So those 4 straight national championships, the closest game of any of them was 2015, and it was still a double-digit game. So and then it doesn't stop there. I think the thing that we need to the next step for women's college basketball is, and this just sometimes just happens where you run into these kind of perfect storms where one team is just so much better than everybody. But Baylor had a close win, a 82-81 win against Notre Dame in 2019. 2020 was canceled because of COVID. Tara Vanderveer wins her last title in 2021 with a 1-point win over Arizona. South Carolina, sneaks past UConn. It was probably worse than it was, but it was 64-49. Most of the games over the last, I would say, 7 or 8 years, with the exception of 2, have been blowouts. And that's not bad for the sport. It's just that's kind of like people could say that about the Super Bowl, right? Some Super Bowls are great, some are really bad. We've been really spoiled lately. This last one was kind of a clunker, unless you're an Eagles fan, right? So it's one of those things where I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that they're heading in the right direction because there's so much more parity during the season. So you'd like to think that at the end of the year, the final 4 and the finals will be good games. I think that's something that we'll definitely keep our eye on. Real quick before we go, playing St. John's tonight. Everybody's healthy. I don't think I have any reports or read anything that there's anything to be concerned for. So again, to me, just stay healthy against these Big East teams heading into South Carolina. And then after that, stay healthy heading into the tournament. Give us the final word.
Final word I wanted to say, just one quick thing. I have a question for you. I want a last second to finish the pod off. Elevator pitch on, obviously we don't have a top recruit coming in. I kind of bring it back to the recruitment aspect and bringing it back to the future of this team. I want your elevator pitch on for fans to get excited about next year's recruitment class, about that 2025-2026 season in 30 seconds. Give it to me.
All right. 2 things. Blanca Quiñonez is a more athletic version of Sarah Strong. She is an absolute blur on the court. She's going to get out in transition. She's going to play better defense than anybody on this team does right now. 1,000%. And she's an incredibly hard worker. And she's semi-Italian because she's been there, and Geno loves that. Gabby Mamel is a solid 6'6". She's not 6'5", and then they put her shoes on her, and she's, a little taller. She is 6'6", standing on her feet, and she is the fastest rim-to-rim runner in the entire class. She gets up and down the floor really fast. That is if there is one word that you can take away from this team is speed. Kellis Fisher makes KK Arnold looks like she's standing still, and I love KK. I'm kind of joking around, but she is another one of these speed demons, about the same height as KK. And so if there was essentially a call to action for this UConn class, it is get me fast players, get me players who can handle our program and who want to be great.
Let's go. I love it. All right, you heard it there from Mark. Listen, this season, we'll see how it goes, but next season, hey, we got some talent coming in regardless of numbers, things like that. Let's get it done.
It's not over yet. It's but I agree. I think there's everything that we've seen this year leads to being like, all right, let's get to the tournament and see what happens. And then if it doesn't happen for Paige in the gals here, then we got a heck of a team coming back next year, and I'm excited about the future. All right, this has been another episode of Locked On UConn for Bella Tomaino, Hoops Capital of the World, and of course Locked On UConn. Myself asking you to stay locked in, stay connected, and it's not about getting it done; it's about doing it in a way that it can't be done any better. As always, go Huskies.